Hey everyone, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show. Available on Apple, Google, Spotify, Edify, Liftable, and wherever you get your podcast. Please tell your friends if you're enjoying the show and share it with them. This is the show where I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how worldview changes everything. My guest on the show today is Pastor Cristian Ionescu. He's a Romanian pastor from Chicago who was charged with disorderly conduct and mob action simply for holding a church service during the pandemic. We're going to hear his perspective on what happened in their church, how they responded, and most important of all, we're going to hear about Pastor Ionescu's growing up in Romania and some of the things he saw happen there that are now happening here. It's a very sobering podcast, and I want to welcome you to this episode. Pastor Cristian Ionescu, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show.
Thank you for having me.
I first heard about you when the media reported that you had been arrested for disorderly conduct and mob action by holding a church service in Chicago.
Actually, it was not an arrest. It was a threat. It was trying to intimidate us and charging us for holding services 6 weeks after the mandate to stay home.
Now, those charges were all dropped, I assume, at some point, but it still demonstrated that there are current day threats to religious liberty. So I'm really grateful for your taking time to be on the show today. And we have a lot to talk about.
Yes, this is a crucial time in American history, and I dare say world history. And we cannot be complacent. We cannot believe that we are still chasing the American dream. I think we are fighting for the very soul of this country.
Wow. And you're saying that as someone who grew up in Romania, which you left because of the oppressive communist policies that came into place in the latter part of the 20th century. But a lot of us in America aren't really aware of what Eastern Europe experienced under communism. And I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little of your story.
As I grew up in Romania, obviously, I was born during the communist regime in 1963. The communist regime had been imposed upon Romania right after the Second World War. And there are some interesting things about how socialism and ultimately communism will come to a country. It has two ways. One is conquest, and second is conversion. Romania was a small country. We had always been right in the middle of the happenings. The big migrations from Far East went through Romania. We were right in between three big empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman Empire. And Romanians always had to play their hand very carefully on the world stage because they were a small fish and easy to swallow. So what happened is when Russia, the Soviet Union, started to gain and ultimately win in the Second World War, they went through Romania towards Germany, and Romania was conquered. And the communist regime from Bolshevik Russia was imposed forcefully on Romania. Romania didn't have a socialist bone in the country. I mean, it was as capitalistic as you can be. So it was impossible to convert Romania in such a short time to communism. As a matter of fact, that generation never thought communism would work in Romania. They had a monarchy. The monarchy was beloved by the people. They had traditional parties, pluralism. The system worked, except for times, short period of times in the Second World War when we had a military dictatorship. But overall, the only way to get communism, socialism and communism to Romania was through conquest. Now, it's very hard to do it in America. You have to cross oceans. And America is not easy to be conquered. So what they used in America is conversion. For the last 60, 70 years, they worked at it diligently, persistently. They started infiltrating and taking over the education system, the entertainment system, the culture. Some of the churches and the spiritual leaders in this country, they took over minorities, victimizing parts of the society, pitting each other against each other. And in the end, that's called class warfare in Marxism. And in the end, look at what we have here. It was through conversion.
Pastor Ionescu, as this is really a compelling point that you're making, and a frightening one, that America not being able to be conquered by socialism and communism has been converted to it. And I want people to understand what that really means. What happened in your experience in Romania? Because you had a vibrant economy, you had a vibrant culture, religious culture, a vibrant culture overall. What effect did communism have on that nation?
I've already said that they're pitting segments of society against each other. They went to such lengths that they were pitting people against each other, even family members against each other, through intimidation. And when people get to a survival mode, they're going to make big compromises. Look at the pandemic. We don't have to look very far. Now, I understand their fears, and I understand the virus is real for so many people. But the way they started to control the whole system, and each individual person falling under the control of the system, is frightening. We already know that this pandemic is made worse than it is. The intimidation of the population, the scare tactics. Look, our church had services from May 10th last year. And we went through COVID like everybody else. Some of our people were infected, as everybody, pretty much most of the people were, and affected by it in a personal way. Mm-hmm. But it was not worse than a seasonal flu flare. We had worse in the past years during winter, when a lot of older people got sick. So I think that the hysteria around this was at least exploited, more sinisterly fabricated, to put people, to switch people into a survival mode. And when people are in that situation, they're going to make compromises. And the first compromise that was required, interestingly, is personal freedom. And it was the same in Romania. Now, in Romania, they had famine after the war, and it was normal. Usually you have a famine and shortage of supplies after a war. They blackmailed them that they would lose their jobs if they didn't cooperate. And they will exterminate and eliminate people that resisted. And the threats that we had upon us, convinced us that it's not beneath these people to use the same tactics that were used in Europe to conquer some of the country. But of course, this is after decades of converting the society through schools, through education, and they infiltrated the weak points and emotional points of the society, especially culture and entertainment.
Can you talk about where you see that happening in America? Because your point about survival is extremely important. If people feel like I'm going to lose my job if I don't comply, I'm going to lose my livelihood, I may lose my life if I don't comply, then they're not able to think about their freedom or anything else. They're just trying to make it from day to day. But talk about those aspects of culture in a little more detail that you're seeing where we're actually under threat in this country.
Socialism is chameleonizing as it entered each society. It identifies the strong points and the weak points. Interestingly, in America, they are using and abusing one of the strongest points in our society, individualism. Mm-hmm. Now, they portrayed individualism as being greedy, selfish, and nothing is further from the truth. American individualism is American exceptionalism because it motivated people to succeed, to create, to do great things. Individualism is at the core of American progress. They turned this individualism against the citizens of this country. Because when they intimidated them, you're going to lose your job if you do not cooperate. It is very personal. It is a threat that applies individually to one's livelihood, family, source of income. And people tend to look at their own situation. They don't understand from a societal standpoint, from the broader view of, hey, what are these people doing to all of us? And it's harder to unite. See, if we would have all the people that are against these mandates unite, stand up, and even if you don't see anything wrong, let's say with a vaccine or something else, just don't take it because you don't want to be part of this system, cooperating with this system, which we already know has very bad intentions for this country. But people are individualistic right now in a way, in a sense that they want to preserve their own livelihood, their own situation. They want to protect their families. And this is how these people use that individualism, which created exceptionalism, against itself.
Got it. So it's a divide and conquer. Yeah. So yes, I see that. And I see that right now with vaccine mandates that have recently been announced. There are a lot of, it's going to hopefully create some issues in the courts about this, but entirely aside from whether someone has taken the vaccine, this is an extremely demanding, oppressive way to go about trying to get people to take the vaccine. I mean, they could have chosen persuasion. They could have chosen dialogue. Instead, choosing mandates that could cause people to lose their jobs if they don't comply.
But this is the way they react to the fact that they don't have a leg to stand on. They don't have science on their side. They don't have precedent on their side. I mean, for a vaccine to be administered en masse to the population, you have to have at least 10, 12 to 15 years of testing. And as I've researched even the CDC's guidelines, the first 5-6 years, you don't even use it, test it on humans. So they're going against everything that they preached for 100 years in science, as far as vaccines are concerned. So they cannot explain it scientifically. The only way they can do it is through political propaganda. I talked to a doctor friend of mine, and I said, "What do you know about this COVID?" And he said, "Your guess is as good as mine." And I said, "You're kidding me. You must be informed. You're trained in epidemiology, and you must receive information every week from these people." I said, "No, I don't receive any science. I receive political propaganda and intimidation."
Wow.
So when you have to deal with such people that you can trust, friends, people that are very well educated in this field, and they say this off the record because they are threatened to lose their jobs, this is pitiful. I went to California recently to a church, and after I spoke about the danger of Marxism and communism, at the end, a couple of very, very well-to-do people came to me, and they said, "Our son, who is in a very high position in a university hospital, has just resigned because he cannot stand the intimidation and the propaganda, and he is forced to do that to his friends and his peers, and he cannot stand it anymore." So this is what's going on.
How do you, if the core attack is to take advantage of individualism and divide people further so that they can't come together, how do you address that?
Well, first and foremost, you need to educate people. I think we need groups of initiative in every city, in every state, creating events where they would call people and educate them, have doctors tell the truth, because there are some doctors that are willing to tell the truth. Have people like me coming from an experience like this and tell the truth. I'm involved with the movement right now, Freedom Initiative in Illinois. They are creating almost every month 1 or 2 events where they call hundreds of people and just talk about these things. Talk about, engage your friends, engage your coworkers, engage your neighbors. This is not a time to be weak, and this is not a time to be afraid. Because if we're going to be afraid now, we're going to be even more afraid later, and it's not going to solve itself. I've seen the way communists work, and yes, they use some persuasion to convince some people to get on their side. I've seen how they can blackmail some people and intimidate some people, but in the end, for them, it is a war of life and death. They will even exterminate their opposition. And I really, really hope, because I've seen it in Romania and in communist countries, it had been documented. I really hope we don't get to that in America. But it is one of the steps on gaining total control. And let's not forget what this is for them. It is gaining total control. They've used this pandemic, as I've said, more sinister interpretation of things is that they fabricated it. But let's just say that they exploited it. For what? To destroy the very good course, economic course, societal course of the country in the last administration, and destroy that administration. Secondly, to test the population, to see how much they can get away with it. And don't forget, thirdly, destroy parallel forms of authority, which communists always hate. We're talking about private education. We're talking about churches. We're talking about families. These parallel forms of authority, they hate. Small business, they don't have a problem with big corporation because they're easy to control, easy to infiltrate, easy to manipulate. But what is a small business? Millions and millions of kings in their own domains. And it's hard to control. So they hate small business, they hate private education, they hate churches, and this is what they're after. And they hate families, because parents are another parallel form of authority. which tend in a way of total control.
And that was actually a campaign issue in a recent statewide election in Virginia. Whose children are they? And it became very clear that some of the people running for office believed that the children belonged to the government, or that the children belonged to the schools and not to the parents.
If I may address that, we see in Europe, in Western Europe, some countries more advanced in socialism than we are. And we envy them and we say, oh, if we could be like Norway, like the Scandinavian countries, and like this country, that country. People forget that, for example, in Norway, the state has an institution called Barnevernet who can confiscate the children from the family just because of the way they're educated in a moral setting, conservative setting. It happened in Germany recently, a family, 7 children taken away from the family just because they're conservative in the way they educate their people, so their children. So whose children are they? Not only they confiscate our children for 8 hours a day, even more, and indoctrinate them in immoral and socialist ways, but if we progress down this path, they can confiscate your children. They have no problem with doing that.
Pastor Ionescu, I'd love for you to tell us the story of how you saw this happen in your own church during COVID. What actually took place, and how did you respond? How did you stand up? And what was the reaction of the people who are in your congregation?
I don't remember this, but my wife tells me, and my children tell me, that while I was watching the news and Governor Pritzker saying that the recovery and for us to get out of this situation with isolation mandates and ordinances would take at least a year, maybe more, I stood up and I just said probably 10, 15 times, and I don't have a recollection of this. I must have been in a zone. I said, this cannot be. This cannot be. This cannot be. I don't even know why I don't remember that. Probably I was absorbed by that situation, but my wife and my children tell me that this is what I did. I said the church cannot survive, and there are some pastors that were converted to this kind of thinking. Oh, the church can survive not having physical gathering. And I said, no, it doesn't even exist if it doesn't have physical gathering. It will not survive. It doesn't exist. And the only problem that I had at that time was I was afraid that it's going to get legally challenging for our church with a lot of expenditures. But then Liberty Council jumped in and offered us representation, and they did a marvelous, marvelous job. So then I said, we are going to reopen the church on the 10th of May. Because in the beginning, we didn't know what we were dealing with. And I thought, let's see, let's wait and see. One of the things that I really not like, let me just use these words. I don't like about these people. They pretend they love and they care about our people more than we do. And this is a travesty. No, they don't. We love our people. These people are our parents, our children, our brothers, sisters, friends. Of course we care about them. But it's not just material. It is spiritual too. We care about their souls too. So we need to mitigate that. And at some point, when everything was open, as far as the markets were concerned, hardware stores, even some restaurants were ready to open, but we were relegated to entertainment and public venues. I said, this cannot be. This cannot be. We offer essential spiritual services to the people. And guess what? They had surveys where it says that the people that attended church during the pandemic were less likely to get into depression, commit suicide,
Right.
having divorces. And so I said, we are going to open. I asked my board for the approval. It was unanimous. We talked about it. Then we created perfect conditions and we protected our people. We created 6 feet bubbles around each person in the sanctuary. One of the questions that I asked the governor and the mayor here, I said, how do you respond to the availability of space issue? You're saying that we can only have services with 10 people. This is an insult. We have almost 1,000 members congregation, and with 10 people, I cannot even record the service online. So where'd you get that? And if we have 800 seats in the sanctuary, why don't you consider the availability of space? It's not just a room, it's a large sanctuary. We sanitize the whole facilities of the church. We called a professional company. We took temperatures at the entrance. We offered masks and gloves. And we did all necessary to protect the people. But then they started to be very abusive. What they did the next Sunday, when we came to church on a Thursday night, I saw posts on the trees. 5 blocks around the church, they said on Sunday, you cannot park here. And they sent postal cards to all the neighbors saying, on Sunday, you are not going to be able to park on the streets because this church does not abide by our mandates. Stay-at-home order.
Wow.
And they wanted to incite people to hate us and to attack us. It didn't happen, but imagine on a Sunday in Chicago not having a parking space on the street. It is vital for the citizens of this city. And what happened at 7 o'clock in the morning, in the 40s, raining, people had to come out of their houses 5 blocks around the church, move their cars. Guess what happened? Some people came to church, said, we support you, and gave us a donation.
Wow.
By the afternoon, the officials understood they couldn't hurt us because they didn't know we were using a private parking lot at a bank nearby. And what did they do? They committed an illegality. They blocked the entrance at 5 o'clock. We started the service at 6 o'clock in the evening. At 5 o'clock, they blocked the entrance to the parking lot. It's a private property. The police cannot do that unless they suspect a crime being committed in that space. Who's going to commit a crime in an empty parking lot at 5 o'clock, an hour before service started? But our people are resourceful. They came in front of the church. Their families came inside the sanctuary. Then the fathers would drive around, find the parking space even far away, and they walked back. And we had a service just as we had it in the morning. They sent us citations. In the end, they were dismissed. And then they threatened us with summary abatement. They turned the health department against us. What summary abatement is, they say you are a hazard to public safety, and in the worst case scenario, they can demolish your facilities.
Wow.
But our people were very courageous. I'm very proud of our congregation, extraordinary people and families. We had our backs, each other's backs, and we not only we survived, we thrived during the pandemic. And trust me, we were not worse off than churches that stayed closed as far as the effects of the pandemics were concerned. As a matter of fact, we fared pretty well.
Good. Yeah. Wow. This is so chilling to hear. the lengths to which the city went. When you talked about they could do things all the way up to demolishing your facilities, it just reminded me of what happens to churches in China.
Yes. See, as I said, we had Liberty Council all the way through. We had a lawsuit against the governor with another Romanian Baptist church, and it went up to the Supreme Court. One of the justices of the Supreme Court, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, had asked the governor for a report for answers to some of his questions about our situation. And 3 hours before the governor had to respond to the Supreme Court justice, he relaxed all the rules in Illinois. And from the most oppressive state in the union, we had become the most free state in the union as far as religious services were concerned. And it was such a blessing and such a victory for us. And since then, they never bothered us again. But I have to mention something very important. And I forgot to mention the infiltration of the media by these forces. They took over the media, which is absolutely crucial in total control of a society. In Romania, the first thing the Red Army did when they invaded, they took over the media.
Right.
The media coverage in Chicago was surprisingly positive. In the least, it was neutral. So I thank God, and I'm very optimistic because we've expected an onslaught against us in the media, and it never happened. These people were very balanced, were very favorable. They gave us time. They listened to us. They let us have our say in the media, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I'm so glad. So the charges were dropped essentially because you went the route that's available to all citizens to go to the courts to solve problems. It's part of the Constitution. You went that route with the help of Liberty Counsel, and it was at that point that the charges against you were dropped, and you began to see the change. What if you hadn't? I mean, what if you hadn't stood up?
I can say that a high percentage of the American churches are still closed. Those that open as a very low percentage compared to what they had before the pandemic. And some churches had shut down completely. I know a pastor in Seattle, Washington area. He closed down the church, and when he wanted to reopen it 2 or 3 months ago, nobody came back. So the church was closed. I believe it was a war of annihilation. It was a death sentence for the church. And with the help of God and our people who stood with us, the church is thriving. We're so very glad to have inaugurated, had the great opening of our new facilities, state-of-the-art facilities. And during the pandemic, the contributions and the donations were even higher than before. So we fared very, very well. Had we not stand up to the government, first of all, I don't think we would have kept the favor of God. I don't think God will give favor to people that don't stand up for Him and His kingdom. And for the pastors that shut down their churches and kept them closed for such a long time, I think this was a treacherous action. It was high treason against the kingdom of God, and they deserve to be fired by their congregations because They should never be the representatives of the government in front of their churches. They should be the representative of their churches in front of the government, fighting for the interest of the church, not the interest of the government. I am not saying that we should disobey government, but there is a time where we have to obey God rather than man. And this was such a time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's clear from the teachings of the Apostle Paul. But even when the Apostle Paul says, obey your authorities, in this country, as Abraham Lincoln said, it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We don't serve government authorities. The government serves the people. And so I really appreciate your courage in standing up, and the courage that this gave to others. We will only know on the other side when we're in heaven. But I want to say thank you for being willing to experience, to be willing to undergo persecution if necessary. And I'm just sorry for our country that that we couldn't recognize it, that it had to be recognized, in the Midwest by people who grew up in the Midwest. It had to be recognized by a pastor who grew up under communism and began to see what is happening here. So you've been a prophetic voice in that way, and I'm very grateful. I'm wondering, Pastor Ionescu, as we close, if you'd be willing to speak to the just the rising generation, young adults who are finding socialism so compelling. What would you say to them by way of warning?
The young generation, we have a young generation that is very emotional. And I'm sorry to say, less rational about things. And you are easy to be deceived. Obviously, no system in the world would come to you advertised as evil.
Right.
You can never have God being duplicitous and good pretend to be evil. It's always evil pretending to be good. These people had proven themselves to be malicious, to be intimidating, to take away our freedoms, to be dismissive of criticism and of sound questions. And it has an element of worship also. If you remember in the beginning, they always said, believe in science. And I had chills down my spine because it really brought kind of a religious add-on to all this hysteria. We have to believe in God. And we have to understand that these people are godless. They preach immorality. They want to bring about the demise of this society. They don't have our interest at heart. Look at their duplicitous activity during the pandemic. Everybody should wear masks. They wouldn't. Everybody should stay home. They didn't. Nobody can cross the border of the state. The governor and his cronies could. So it was such hypocrisy in display. And I would ask the young generation to look at the past of this country, how amazing it had been, how great the prosperity and the blessings of this country had been. And they were given by God on two premises: freedom and support for the state of Israel. I believe that America is a projection of Archangel Michael, the protector of the people of Israel. For as long as America would stay the course and would protect freedom around the world, would be a country based on Judeo-Christian values, and for as long as this country would stand with Israel, America will continue to be great. The very moment America will abdicate from these mandates, not by man, but by God, I believe America will fall. So I'm praying that America will understand what its destiny is. because this destiny comes with prosperity and blessing.
Pastor, thank you. Thank you for being on the show today and for sharing this. This is a sobering message, but I'm grateful and thank you for your courage.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity.
A special thanks to my guest today, Pastor Cristian Ionescu, for coming on the Dr. Jeff Show. You can read his story online. You can follow him on Twitter at CRI. I'm going to have to start that over because I don't know how to. CR Ionescu. CR. Yeah. Okay. All right, I got it. Okay. A special thanks to my guest today, Pastor Cristian Ionescu, for coming on the Dr. Jeff Show. You can read his story online. You can follow him on Twitter at, I'm going to spell it out for you, CRIONESCU. The Bible has a lot of stories of faithful believers who resisted tyranny, whether it was in Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, the Roman Empire, while they learned how to live wisely in their particular age. So I'm thankful to people like Pastor Ionescu who can offer insights on how we can do the same thing in the time in which we live. See you next week. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Dr. Jeff Show. It's a podcast from Summit Ministries, summit.org. Summit is a nonprofit ministry that exists to equip and support the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. For nearly 60 years, Summit Ministries has been training students and those who work with students to develop, deepen, and defend a biblical worldview through life-changing conferences, thoughtful church, homeschool and Christian school curriculum books, free online resources, and more. If you want to live out a biblical worldview in today's world, and you desire to instill a lifelong faith in the rising generation, visit summit.org/The Dr. Jeff Show for more information. Listeners, I want you to know that our podcast is on Edify, which is a truly powerful app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. You can download it at Edify, EDIFI.app. Be sure to share this show if you have enjoyed listening to it. And leave a review, if you would, on the site where you download the show. That helps more people know about the Dr. Jeff Show. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.